Have you ever walked into a room and felt like you disappeared? Not because anyone said it, not because you weren't dressed nicely or didn't belong, but because no one really looked at you. Conversations passed over you, smiles were polite, but distant. Your voice felt like background noise in a world that's forgotten how much you've lived, how much you've carried, how much you still are. If you've ever sat alone in a living room that used to be full, or stood in a mirror wondering when your reflection stopped mattering, please hear me now. You are not alone. And more importantly, you are not invisible. But I know it can feel that way. Somewhere between raising children, holding families together, managing homes, caring for aging parents, and navigating life's storms. Many women, especially after 60, start to feel like they've quietly stepped off the stage, not by choice, but because the spotlight has moved, and now you're left clapping for others. While you wonder when it became so easy for the world to look through you, Margaret Sektawi told me something recently that broke my heart a little. She said, "It's like I used to be the center of everything, and now I could vanish for a week and no one would notice until the fridge was empty or the phone stopped ringing." She said it with a smile, but it wasn't a joyful one. It was the kind of smile women wear when they've gotten used to being overlooked. But what if I told you that your power didn't vanish? That it was never taken, only buried under years of self-sacrifice and silence? Because here's the first truth I want you to remember. You didn't disappear, you just got quiet. And quiet doesn't mean powerless. You've spent decades putting others first, saying yes when you were tired, making peace when you were hurt, nurturing others even when your own heart needed care. You've lived through joys and losses most people wouldn't understand. You've made impossible decisions. You've rebuilt after heartbreaks. You've stayed up at night worrying about others. And now, after all of that, the world dares to treat you like a footnote in your own story. No, that's not how this ends. Your power didn't fade. It was never in how loudly you spoke or how much you gave. It was in your endurance, your grace, your fire, even when it flickered in secret. Helen, 72, used to believe her best years were behind her. Her adult children were busy. Her husband, gone for years. Her friends, spread out or moved on. She told me, "I used to sit by the window, watching the world go on without me. I felt like a relic, like I was taking up space no one needed anymore." But then something changed. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't go skydiving or start a business. She just started walking every morning, not to lose weight, not to impress anyone, but because it made her feel present, alive, grounded. And on those walks, she began speaking to herself again, not with judgment, but with kindness. She started to say, "I'm still here. I still matter. I still have things to say." Because here's the second truth. Your value isn't measured by who sees you. It's measured by how you see yourself. The world might forget. The people around you might get busy, but your spirit remembers. Your soul still knows who you are. You don't need to be the center of anyone else's world to return to being the center of your own. Sophie, 26, had spent her entire life being the reliable one, the family planner, the holiday host, the peacekeeper. But after retirement, her phone rang less. She stopped getting invited to gatherings. Her children assumed she was fine, but never really checked in. She said, "I started to feel like a shadow of who I used to be, like I only mattered when I was useful." So she did something radical. She stopped waiting to be needed. She took a class at the community center, bought herself flowers, went to the theater alone. And you know what happened? Nothing earth-shattering. No one threw her a party or apologized, but something far better happened. She felt herself again. For the first time in years, she looked in the mirror and didn't see someone waiting to be remembered. She saw a woman reclaiming her life not for attention, but for truth. And that's the third truth. You do not need permission to be seen. You only need to stop hiding, not in a loud way, not to prove a point, but in those quiet, daily choices to show up for yourself. Wear the bright scarf. Join the class. Share your opinion. Say no. Say yes. Laugh too loud. Rest without guilt. Reclaim your space in this world not because anyone handed it to you, but because you've earned every inch of it. Invisibility isn't always something others do to us. Sometimes we learn to fade ourselves. We make ourselves small to avoid judgment. We dim our light so others won't feel uncomfortable. We apologize for taking up space we were never meant to shrink from. But that's over now. Because the woman you were before motherhood, before marriage, before roles and responsibilities, that woman is still in there. She hasn't disappeared. She's just waiting for your permission to come back into the light. And she's not too old. She's not too late. She's not past her time. She's just getting started. There's something deeply woven into many women's hearts, especially those who've spent a lifetime caring for others. This belief that being good means being quiet, that being loved means being easy, that if we keep giving, keep smiling, keep softening every sharp edge eventually, someone will stop and truly see us. But what happens when they don't? What happens when the years pass and the effort you've poured into others doesn't come back in the way you'd hoped? Not because you did something wrong, but because you've been playing a role for so long that even you started to forget where it ended and where you began. Grace knows that feeling well. She was 74 when she told me, "I spent most of my life being what everyone needed: a mother, a wife, a daughter, a nurse, a friend. And now that the noise has died down, I don't know what's left." Sometimes I walk past a mirror and barely recognize the woman looking back. But here's the beautiful truth she eventually discovered. You are not your role. You are your essence. That essence doesn't retire. It doesn't disappear when the last child moves out. It doesn't dissolve when the phone grows quiet. It lives underneath all the labels: patient, caregiver, organizer, peacemaker. It lives in your laughter, in your opinions, in your pain, in your intuition. It lives in the way your spirit rises a little when someone finally asks, "And how are you?" Because here's what we don't say enough. Being a woman who's lived through 6, and 7, or even 8 decades doesn't mean your voice has expired. It means it has been seasoned. It carries weight, not because you yell, but because you've earned the right to speak softly and still be heard. But for that voice to return, we must understand what silenced it in the first place. Sophie, who we met earlier, said something that cut right to the heart. I got so good at saying whatever works for you that I forgot what I wanted for myself. It sounds simple, doesn't it? But it's not. It's generations of being trained to please, to nod instead of object, to smooth things over instead of standing up. And it happens slowly, over decades, until suddenly you're living in the background of your own life, keeping the peace while quietly falling apart. That's the pattern many women fall into after 60. Over-sacrificing as a substitute for being seen. We stay helpful. We stay needed. We offer our time, our money, our availability, not because we're weak, but because we want connection. We want to matter. And somewhere deep down, we hope that all this giving will be enough to secure a seat at the table. But here's the turning point, something you may already feel rising inside you now. You don't have to be needed to be worthy. You don't need to be anyone's emergency contact to belong in this world. You don't need to fill every silence with helpfulness to deserve attention. And you certainly don't need to keep saying yes out of fear that you'll be forgotten. Margaret had a moment like this when she declined watching her grandchildren for the 3rd weekend in a row. Not because she didn't love them, but because she was tired. She had a quiet plan to spend her Saturday painting in the backyard, listening to her favorite music. When she told her daughter, she was met with guilt. "I just thought you'd want to spend time with them." In the past, Margaret would have caved. She would have pushed down her needs and rearranged everything. But this time, she didn't. She calmly replied, "I love them deeply, and I want to show up for them from a place of fullness, not depletion. I'll be rested and excited to see them next week." And for the first time, her daughter paused and respected it. Because here's what we begin to realize as we shed the old skin of people-pleasing. Respect doesn't come from over-functioning. It comes from inner clarity. When you know who you are, when you stop apologizing for existing, when you choose your well-being without guilt, something changes. Not just within you, but around you. People feel it. Your children, your friends, even strangers. They begin to sense the dignity in your presence. And that dignity, it's not loud, it's not flashy, it's not desperate, it's rooted. Helen, who once avoided all forms of conflict with her adult daughter, told me she finally found peace the day she said, "I'm not here to argue. I'm here to be treated with care." It was a short sentence, spoken with love, but it marked a shift from reaction to ownership, because real power doesn't chase approval. It doesn't beg to be noticed. It simply refuses to disappear. And the beautiful thing is, you don't need to have all the answers right now. You don't need to fix your life. You just need to begin listening to that quiet inner voice again, the one that's been whispering for years. There is more for you, more joy, more depth, more freedom. And it begins when you stop asking permission to come alive again. You are not behind. You are not late. You are exactly where you need to be to remember what has always been yours. This isn't about reinventing yourself. It's about returning, gently, fiercely, fully. There's something truly beautiful that happens when a woman stops waiting to be seen and simply starts seeing herself, not in a grand, showy way, not with fireworks or announcements, but in the quiet, steady way that changes everything. She moves differently. She speaks with less urgency. She stops shrinking in her own home. She shows up, not needing to be invited into the conversation, but knowing she belongs there. And that shift, it changes the atmosphere. Helen once said to me, "I used to think people didn't respect me because they didn't care. But I started to realize they didn't respect me because I had forgotten how to carry myself with respect." That wasn't self-blame. It was awareness. Because when you've spent years in service to others, years softening yourself to be more acceptable, it can be easy to forget that you are the one setting the tone. But when you remember, when you come back to yourself, it's like turning on a light in a room you thought had gone dark. And other people, especially your family, begin to feel that light. Grace told me that once she started saying what she actually felt, not rudely, not aggressively, but honestly, her relationships shifted. At first, her daughter was surprised. "You've changed, Mom," she said, but not in a bad way. Grace wasn't snapping. She wasn't cold. She had simply stopped apologizing for needing time, for having preferences, for speaking her truth. One morning, after decades of being the family organizer, the holiday host, the giver, she said, "This year, I'd love for someone else to plan Easter. I'll bring a dish, but I want to enjoy it as a guest." There was silence, some discomfort, a bit of awkwardness. But then her son said, "Okay, I can take it on." And that was it. The sky didn't fall. The world didn't end. The family didn't collapse. In fact, for the first time in a long time, Grace showed up to a gathering and felt present, not exhausted, not bitter, just there, in her own skin, unburdened. Because here's a truth that no one tells you. The moment you stop over-functioning is the moment people start rising around you. When you stop filling every gap, others learn to step in. When you stop being endlessly available, they learn to value your presence more deeply. When you stop doing everything, they realize what you were actually carrying. You see, being invisible isn't just about how others treat you. It's also about how you treat yourself in their presence. When you start valuing your time, others do too. When you slow your yes, people learn to listen harder when you speak. When you stop centering everyone else's comfort and begin honoring your truth, you become magnetic, not because you're trying harder, but because you've stopped trying to disappear. Margaret shared a moment with me that felt so simple, but so powerful. She said she stopped waiting for others to notice when she wasn't okay. She started telling them, not in guilt, not with drama, just honestly. One day, after a long week with little sleep, she called her daughter and said, "I love you, but I'm feeling stretched thin. I need some quiet this weekend." And her daughter, who usually would have pressed, simply said, "I understand, because boundaries, when spoken with love, don't push people away. They invite people to love you more clearly. You are allowed to make space for your own joy. You are allowed to choose how you spend your time. You are allowed to say, 'That doesn't work for me,' without guilt. And you are allowed always to take up space in your own life." Chloe, who had spent most of her life organizing everyone else's calendars, finally took a solo trip to the coast, just 2 nights. She didn't ask anyone's opinion. She just booked a little room by the sea. She told me, "I walked along the shore with my coffee in hand, and I felt 30 years younger, not because of my body, but because of how light I felt." That's what happens when you start returning to yourself. The body may age, but the spirit wakes up. You start to remember how much beauty still lives inside you, how much wisdom is waiting to be shared, how much strength you've always had hidden, but not lost. And here's the most unexpected part. When you begin to live this way, others respond not because you taught them a lesson, but because they feel the difference. They feel your clarity, your steadiness, your warmth that no longer comes with self-erasure. And even if they don't say it, even if they're not ready to meet you there, you will feel it in you. You will breathe easier. You will laugh louder. You will stop second-guessing your worth. And you'll realize that the power you thought you had lost was never lost at all. It was simply waiting for you to come home. You don't need to be loud to reclaim your place. You don't need to prove anything to start living from truth. You only need to remember this. You are not invisible. You are not finished. And you are not less just because the world is noisy and forgetful. You are here, and you are powerful. Thank you for being here with me. Not just for watching, but for opening your heart to this conversation, for giving yourself permission to feel, to remember, to reawaken something that may have been quiet for far too long. If any part of this message resonated with you, if you've ever felt invisible, overlooked, or forgotten, please hear me now. You are not alone. And more than that, you are not forgotten. You are seen. You are valued. You are still writing your story. I know the world can be loud. I know it sometimes feels like it only celebrates the young, the fast, the new, but you are living proof that there is beauty in depth, that there is power in presence, that there is light in a woman who has loved, lost, endured, and still chooses to rise every day. And maybe you're still on that journey. Maybe today was the first time in a long time that someone reminded you of your voice. If so, I'm honored to be part of that moment. Because your voice matters, even if it trembles, even if it's soft, even if you're still learning how to use it again. You don't have to become someone else to feel powerful. You just have to return to yourself. That woman you used to be, the one who dreamed, who danced, who had opinions she didn't water down, who stood tall in her own body without shame. She's not gone. She's here. And she's waiting for you to stop apologizing for your presence and start celebrating it again. You may not be the loudest in the room. You don't have to be, because your power was never in volume. It's in your grace, your wisdom, your resilience, your ability to keep showing up with love in a world that sometimes forgets to offer it back. And if you've made it to the end of this video, I'd love to hear your story. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family or community? What helped you rediscover your voice, or what are you still longing to find? If you feel comfortable, please share in the comments. Your story matters not just to me, but to someone else who might be reading and feeling the very same way you once did. Your truth could be the light someone else needs to remember their own. And if this video made you feel seen, if it reminded you of your worth, even just a little, I'd love for us to stay connected. Click subscribe if you'd like more messages like this, more space to breathe, more reminders that your story isn't over, that it's still unfolding and it's still yours. You don't need to prove your worth to anyone. You don't need to earn your place in the world through sacrifice and silence. You are worthy because you exist, because you have lived, because you have endured, because you are still here. So take this moment not to rush back into tasks or obligations, but to place your hand on your heart and remember who you are. You are not invisible. You are a force. You are a story still being told, and it is far from finished. So walk gently, speak honestly, rest deeply, and shine, even if softly, because the world doesn't need you to disappear. It needs you just as you are. And I am so glad you're still here.